Hi, fifth graders. Welcome back to Chapter 10. Today we are working with Lesson 10.5 over metric measures. This is found on page 611 in our Go Math textbook. Our essential question is asking how can you compare and convert metric units? So the standard we are working with today is still under the measurement and data 5.1. I can convert among different size standard measurement units within a given measurement system and use these conversions in solving multi-step real-world problems. So as we are doing our metric conversions, there is a saying we like to use in the fifth grade, and that saying is, King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. Now, obviously, we use this saying because each letter of the word, each first letter of the word, is representing a prefix for our metric system. So our first prefix for king, the K, is measuring in kilos. So when we are working with these prefixes, they can be added on to the meter, liter, or gram measurements. A meter is measuring in length, our metric units. A liter is the capacity, so the volume of how much fluid. And then the gram is our weight of each of our measurements. So when we were working with customary units, we obviously had different abbreviations and words that we were using for the customary system. However, for the metric system, you use the same exact prefixes, and then you can add it on to whatever unit of measure you're working with, which again is the meter, the liter, or the grams. So again, going back to the kilo, so if we were working with a kilo, that means you have 1,000 units. So if you were working with your meters, your length, a kilometer is the longest unit of measure that the metric system has. And again, it's 1,000 units of one of those meters. Going on to the next one, hecto. That one is not as common in the United States that you would see using measurements, but a hectometer, it would be equal to 100 of your units. So if, again, you were working with the meters, it would take 100 meter sticks to make a hectometer. Same with the hectoliter and the hectogram. The next one for dyed is deca. So when we are working with deca, you will notice the abbreviations at the bottom for the decameter, deciliter, and decagram. We do have the abbreviation of DA to represent deca because you obviously see that there is another prefix that starts with a D as well. So to be able to tell the difference between the two when you abbreviate them, the deca is abbreviated with the DA to help us out with that. Now notice a deca unit is 10 of those units. So if you have a decameter measuring in length, it would take 10 meter sticks to create a decameter. Again, this is another unit of measure that you do not see as often within the metric system. The next word, by, that's just representing our base. Our base is our meters, which are in length. That is using your meter stick, your anything to measure length. The liter, that is volume. So for in the United States, the U.S. customary measurements, that's working with your capacity with the fluid ounces, cups, pints, quarts, and gallons. Well, with the metric system, you are measuring those in liters for our volume. And then finally, the gram, that's the mass or the weight of a unit. So that is our base that we always refer back to. So that would be like for your meters, that's 1 meter stick. That is representing a meter. Going on to the smaller side of things, so next we have drinking, which is representing deci. Deci means that it is 10 times smaller than your base unit. So what you have to think of when you are thinking of a meter stick, a decimeter would be 1 decimeter would be 1/10 of a meter stick. So it takes 10 decimeters to create that meter stick. So if you were looking at your meter stick counting by tens, every 10 would be your decimeter. Then for the chocolate centi, that would be 100 times smaller than your base measurement. So again, using the meter stick, you would have 100 centimeters in 1 meter. And then finally, the milk for milli. So millimeters, again, let me scroll up here to see the bottom of this. A millimeter, it takes 1,000 of those to create your meter. So if you would look at a meter stick, all of those little lines that you see on the stick, that is representing 1 millimeter. So 1 millimeter, or I'm sorry, 1,000 millimeters makes up 1 meter. And again, looking at that, then you would notice that 10 millimeters creates 1 centimeter, and so on and so forth. So if you are able to write this down on a piece of paper, we will try to get this scanned in and posted on Schoology. With our technology still being a little bit down, it is hard to scan some of these things in. But we will try to have this paper posted on Schoology to allow you to print it. But until we do, or until you can print it out, you may want to write this information down, especially the abbreviations per prefix. Those abbreviations will definitely help you out when you are working with any problem on your own. You can easily find those abbreviations within this piece of paper. You will notice at the bottom of this piece of paper, it does say that if you are going from a small unit of measure to a larger unit of measure, you are going to be dividing, kind of like our flight of horse divide, of course. So divide numbers by 10 if you are getting bigger, same as moving the decimal point 1 space to the left. So if you recall from chapter 5, when we were dividing with our decimals, we knew that anytime we had to divide, we would swoop to the left from the decimal, the number of zeros that we had to move when we were dividing by powers of 10. The same thing for multiplying. So if you were going from a large unit of measure to a smaller unit of measure, your horse to fly multiply, you're multiplying by numbers, or multiplying numbers by 10 if you're getting smaller. And that's the same as moving your decimal point 1 space to the right. So if I was moving from multiplying by a power of 10, I would move the decimal to the right however many zeros that I was multiplying by. So that's essentially what we were doing. We're tying and multiplying and dividing decimals within this lesson. So going on to page 611, underneath Unlock the Problem, it says, using a map, Alex estimates the distance between his house and his grandparents' house to be about 15,000 meters. About how many kilometers away from his grandparents' house does Alex live? Well, like I said, the metric system is based upon place value. Each unit is related to the next largest or next smallest unit by a power of 10. So for this question, to make sure we're understanding what it is that we are solving, we need to make sure we underline the sentence that tells us what we are trying to find. And that is the very last part. It says, about how many kilometers away from his grandparents' house does Alex live? And we know that we are going to start with the 15,000 meters. They give us the measurement in meters, and they want our final answer to be in kilometers. So we know we are converting from meters to kilometers. So when you are converting 15,000 meters into kilometers, I do want to make sure that I'm either multiplying or dividing by powers of 10. Well, because I'm starting at the meters, and I know I have to go to the kilometers, I know that I'm going from small to big, so that would essentially be fly to horse. I need to divide, of course. And for each swoop, this again, that's what we call them. For each swoop, I'm technically dividing by a power of 10. So if I have 1, 2, 3 swoops that it takes me to go from a meter to a kilometer, that means I'm dividing by 10 to the third power. So I do know that meters are 3 powers of 10 smaller than a kilometer. And I also know, because if it's 3 swoops, that essentially means 3 zeros. There are 1,000 meters in 1 kilometer. So now I have to determine my operation that's being used. Well, because I said I'm going from small to large, I am going fly to horse. I am going to divide. I'm converting from a smaller unit to a larger unit. So I will divide, of course. And next I can go ahead and do my conversion. So I know that I'm dividing. I know because it took 3 swoops to go from a meter to a kilometer, it was dividing by 1,000. So when I actually divide this, remember back from chapter 5, if there is no decimal to swoop from, you always start from the end of the number. And because there are 3 zeros, I'm swooping 3 place values, and remember division is to the left. So therefore, once I swoop that decimal 3 place values to the left, I find that it is 15 kilometers. So Alex's house is 15 kilometers from his grandparents' house. Moving on to the next page. This next question, they do have us using a diagram. Again, you use whatever method is most comfortable for you. But after this next question, I am going to start to kind of talk you through how I would solve them without having to really say that you're multiplying or dividing by which power of 10. So Jamie made a bracelet 1.8 or 1 1/8 decimeters long. How many millimeters long is Jamie's bracelet? So for this, we have the starting, with the base unit. Deci is right beside it to the right. And remember it says it's 1 1/8 decimeters. So that means it's 1 decimeter and 8/10 of another decimeter. So that 8/10 would be in the centimeter place value. So in this chart, I have the 1 1/8 listed. And since the unit is decimeters, I know that we have to go to millimeters. We now have to figure out how to convert the decimeters to millimeters. So they want us to cross out for step 2 the decimal point, and they want us to rewrite it so that there will be millimeters, and will be the whole number unit. And they want us to write zeros to the left of the decimal point as needed to complete the whole number. So for this, they do want us to show now that we do have a 0 placed in the millimeters unit, and they also want us to then show that as a whole number. That's why we crossed out that decimal. So we do see from this that it is 180 millimeters. Now for a lot of people, that is a little bit of a confusing method. So what I suggest you do is, I would suggest you write the first letter of each prefix down. So I have my K, H, D, A, B, D, C, M. And again, King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. I just keep remembering that sentence so that way I know the letters that I'm supposed to write. Now I know that we are starting at 1 1/8 decimeters. So I'm going to underline the letter that I am starting with. So I'm starting with the decimeters. And I see that I need to convert it to millimeters. So I'm going to underline the M that represents my millimeters. So because I am moving from a decimeter to a millimeter, I know that I am going to be essentially going from a big unit of measure to a small unit of measure. So I'm technically multiplying, and I'm going to figure out what I would be multiplying by showing those swoops. So it takes me 2 swoops to go from a decimeter to a millimeter. So I'm essentially multiplying by 100. Now I don't need to show that I'm multiplying by 100 because I know that when I multiply by 100, I just have to move that decimal point 2 places to the right to get my final answer. So for my 1 8/10 decimeters, I am going to show swooping that decimal 2 places to the right. So I have 1, 2, and if you recall, whenever you have an empty swoop, you always have to use a 0 as your place value holder to get your final answer. So that is another way how to show 180 millimeters. That is the way that I will start to use for the majority of the questions that we solve together. Moving down to the try this, they want us to complete the equation to show the conversions and then actually do the conversions. So they want us to convert 247 milligrams to centigrams, decigrams, and then grams. They want to know, are the units being converted to a larger unit or a smaller unit? And then they want us to show if we're multiplying or dividing by powers of 10. So again, I'm going to write those letters. King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. And then I can easily figure out what I'm converting if I'm actually multiplying or dividing. So for all of them, I am starting at the milligrams. Remember, milligrams is the M, so I'm going to underline the M. And then I'm going to be converting to centigrams, decigrams, and then finally grams. So for each one of those, it's going to the next larger unit of measure. So I am going from small or fly to horse. So I do know that I need to divide, of course. So we just answered that we are going to a larger unit of measure for each of the conversions. And we also did say that we are going to divide each time. So I am going to show my division problem. And then I'm going to go ahead and divide. We do know that when we're dividing by powers of 10, we swoop from the decimal. And if there is no decimal, that starts at the end. So for my first conversion, I'm going to place my original decimal. And then dividing by a power of 10, that would be 1 0, so 1 swoop. Or if you look from milligrams to centigrams, that also shows you 1 swoop. So 1 swoop to the left since we're dividing, and that gives me 24 7/10 centigrams. Now, using a different color, I'm going to show the same thing from milligrams, but this time I need to go to decigrams. So I see that it is essentially dividing by 100. My decimal starts at the very end of the number. So 2 swoops to go from milligrams to decigrams. So that's why it is 2 zeros for 100. So swooping 2 place values to the left for my 247 now gives me 2 47 hundredths. And then finally, my last one, I'm working from milligrams again, this time to grams, which we know is my base. So going from milligrams to grams, and again, it is always easier to recognize that your base unit is a single letter, where all of your other abbreviations have 2 letters, and that is because they have a prefix in front. Your base unit will always be the single letter. So to go from milligrams to grams, I see that there are 1, 2, 3 swoops. So that's why we are dividing by 1,000. So from the end of my number, 1, 2, 3 to the left gives me 247 thousandths. Remember, the 0 in front that I've placed right here is not necessary, but it is helpful to make sure it reminds you to place that decimal. Moving on to B, this time they want us to convert 3 9/10 hectoliters to deciliters, liters, and deciliters. So I'm going to write those prefixes again. So King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. And now I need to make sure I answer the 2 questions. The first, are the units being converted to a larger unit or a smaller unit? So if you recall, it does say 3 9/10 hectoliters. So I know I'm starting at the H. And then they want us to convert to deciliters, liters, which is at my base, and deciliters. So I do see that I'm going from large to small, so I am going to a smaller unit. And when you go from horse to fly, we know that we are multiplying. So place all my multiplication symbols. And now I can go ahead and solve. So if you recall from chapter 4, when multiplying by increasing powers of 10, we need to swoop to the right. And then to help us figure out those powers of 10 that they did write down for our multiplication problem, I am going to show it up with the letters. So if I'm going from hectoliters to deciliters, remember the deciliters, the DA, deciliters. So I see that to go from hectoliters to deciliters, it is one swoop to the right. So that is why we are multiplying by 10. That is our increasing power of 10. And from our decimal, I'm now going to swoop one place value to the right. So when I do that, I have the answer of 39 deciliters. Moving to the next color, again, starting at hectoliters. This time they want us to go to liters, which remember is our base, because you see that that is a single letter abbreviation. So to show that y is multiplying by 100, I have 1, 2 swoops. Again, it's to the right. So with the 2 zeros, 1, 2 to the right, that does give me 390 when I add a 0 to that empty swoop. And finally, I have 3 9/10 hectoliters, and I want to change that into deciliters. So that does go from the H 1, 2, 3 units to the right. That is why we are multiplying by 1,000 with the 3 zeros. So from my decimal 1, 2, 3 to the right, when I fill in those empty swoops, I have 3,900 deciliters. Now moving on to page 613, under the share and show. These last two questions are the last two that I will actually show the true multiplication and division problem. After that, I'm going to show you the shortcut that I would expect you to do for your homework. So for question number 1, again, we want to make sure we have those letters. King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. And I know that for each of these, I'm starting at my liters, which the single letter abbreviation tells me to start at the B, which is my base. And then I want to convert to deciliters, centiliters, and milliliters. So I am going from large to small, so horse to fly. I am going to multiply. And they already tell us the power of 10. So for the first one, the liters to deciliters, that was one swoop to the right, so that's why I have a 10 with the 1 0. So from my decimal, one swoop gives me 84 7/10. Next, from the liters, again, the base, to the centiliters, I am swooping 2 place values to the right. So that is why we are multiplying by 100 with the 2 zeros. So from the decimal, 1, 2 to the right does give me 847 centiliters. And finally, the liters again at the base to the milliliters, the M. So swooping 1, 2, 3 place values to the right to go from the liters to the milliliters. That is why we are multiplying by 1,000 for those 3 zeros. So from that decimal, 1, 2, 3 place values to the right. When I add a 0 to the empty swoop, that does give me 8,470 milliliters. For question number 2, again, write that King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. And notice that for the first conversion number, we are working with 9,824 decigrams. So I start at my decigrams, my D, and they want us to convert to grams, which single letter always takes me to the base, decagrams, to the DA, and then the hectograms, which is the H. So I am going from a small unit of measure to larger unit of measures. So therefore, fly to horse, divide of course. And when I go to divide these, I do see that to go from decagrams to grams, that is one swoop to the right. Remember, dividing is swooping, or I'm sorry, one swoop to the left. And remember, dividing is swooping to the left. So 1 0 tells me again one swoop from the end of the number since there is no decimal. So my final answer is 982 and 4/10 grams. The next question, I have decigrams again to decagrams this time, so the DA. So that is taking me 2 swoops to the left. Left is dividing, and 2 swoops is by 100. So from the end of the number, 1, 2, does take my decimal to the 98 and 24 hundredths. And then the last question on number 2, I am converting again from the decigrams, but this time to the hectograms. And it is 1, 2, 3 swoops to the left. That's why left is dividing. 3 is by 1,000. And so from the end of my number where my decimal is understood to be, 3 swoops to the left does take me in between the 9 and the 8. So I have 9 and 824 thousandths. Now for the rest of the questions that I'm going to show you for my conversions, and I'm not going to do all of them on page 316, but for the rest of these questions, I am each time, since we do not have that piece of paper available to us right now, going to write down the letters to help us easily figure out the number of swoops and the direction that we are going to swoop. So for number 3, King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. I do know that I'm starting with centimeters, so I'm going to underline the C to represent centimeters. And this is where people get tricked because I'm converting to meters. A lot of people try to underline the M because they think M represents meters. But this is where I told you that if you have a single letter abbreviation, that automatically takes you to the base unit. Any other abbreviation, when they're 2-letter abbreviations, or even for deca, the 3 letters, you always go to then that letter within my saying. But when it's the single letter, that tells you to go to the base. So I am again going from centimeters to meters. So I am going to swoop 1, 2 to the left, and that tells me then to get my final answer from the decimal. So remember, that's at the end. 1, 2 to the left takes me from the centimeters to the meters. So that would give me the final answer of 42, and you can put the 0 behind the 5 for 50 hundredths, or obviously the 42 and 5/10 also means the exact same thing. So to show our work for these questions, we just have to figure out the number of swoops and then show the swoops and going in the correct direction. So for number 4, write your letters again. So for number 4, it wants us to start at the milliliters, so that's the M for milli. And they want us to finish at the liters, so that is the B, the base. And we notice that if we are going from the milli to the base, we are going 1, 2, 3 units to the left. So from the end of my number, since there is no decimal, 1, 2, 3 to the left. Now when you go to type in that answer or write it down, you would only write the number 6. You wouldn't put .000 behind it. Remember, you do not need those zeros because you've now converted it to a single digit whole number. And then same for number 5. For this one, they do have us going from decigrams, which remember that's the single letter D, and they want us to go to centigrams, which is the C. So to go from decigrams to centigrams, we are swooping one place value to the right. And so from the 4, remember the decimal is understood to be at the end, one swoop to the right, just like I did for those letters. That does give me the final answer of 40 when I add a 0 to the empty swoop. So I would pause at this point, try 6, 7, and 8 on your own. Once you figure those out, go ahead and unpause it, and I will have the answers then written down for you. So for question number 6, when you convert 7 grams into milligrams, you are going from a large unit to a small unit. So that does give me 7,000 milligrams. For number 7, you're going from kilometers to meters. Again, you're going from a large unit to a small unit. So that does give me 5,000 meters. And for number 8, you are going from milliliters to deciliters. So you are going from small to big. So when you swoop, you do get 15 and 21 hundredths deciliters. Now for 9, 10, and 11, notice we do have some comparisons. And when we were using the U.S. customary units, we've always said to change the larger unit of measure into the smaller unit of measure. Well, because when you are working with the metric system, it's just a matter of swooping your decimal. It really does not matter which unit of measure that you are changing. So each one I might do a different unit of measure, and that's okay, but I just need to make sure that I'm changing it to the unit of measure that you are comparing to. So for number 9, I have 32 hectograms, and I'm comparing it to 3 2/10 kilograms. So because the decimal is already in the kilograms, I'm just going to go ahead and use that one, and I want to convert that into hectograms. So if you recall, we have King Henry. I really don't need anything else after that because that's the 2 letters that I need to work with. But if I wanted to continue it on, I would put the rest of the letters for my saying. Now, remember I did say that I'm going to this time convert the 3 2/10 kilograms into hectograms. So I'm starting at the kilograms and I want to finish at the hectograms. So that was one swoop to the right. So from my decimal, one swoop to the right does give me 32 hectograms. And when I compare those, I do see that they are equal to each other. For number 10, again, I'm just going to rewrite this. And this time, again, it really doesn't matter which unit of measure you want to convert. I'm going to go ahead and convert the 6 kilometers into meters, but we can convert the 660 meters into kilometers. It does not matter. So if I'm working with kilometers and I'm converting to meters, remember the meters is our base unit, I'm going to be swooping 3 place values to the right. So from the 6 kilometers, 3 swoops to the right. That does just tell me to add 3 zeros behind the 6 to convert it into meters. So I do know that 6,000 meters is larger than 660 meters. And finally, we have 525 milliliters compared to 525 centiliters. So really, to be honest, you don't have to show much conversion if you understand what a meter stick looks like and understand the different lines to represent the different markings for the millimeters and centimeters. But we're going to go ahead and show to really help us understand why the one changes and is bigger than the other. So I'm going to go ahead and convert the 525 milliliters into centiliters. So I see that it is one swoop to the left to go from milli to centi. So from the end of my number, once to the left gives me 52 and 5/10 centiliters. And I do see that that one would be less than the 525 centiliters. Notice that the L for liters is capitalized, and that is just so that way there's no confusion over if it is a 1 or an L. So anytime you are working with liters, please just get in the habit of capitalizing that L. So now moving on to the homework. On the front, at the top of your paper, you may want to put those letters, or just put it with each question that you have to do, depending on how much you need to rely on it. So again, King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. And on the front, you are going to do all of the even problems except for number 18. So 2, 4, 6, 8. Those are all going to be a drag and drop type of question, just because there are now decimals and you can have the zeros, or you can take some zeros away to create no confusion over the scoring. Those are drag and drop type questions. Then 10, 12, and 14. Again, those are the drop down boxes to choose the correct symbol. And then finally on the front, number 16. Number 16 says Bria ordered 145 centimeters of fabric. Jaylene ordered 1 5/10 meters of fabric. Who ordered more fabric? So you are going to have to convert one of those unit of measures into the other unit of measure. So that way you can then compare them into both units. So for me, I would probably change Jaylene's meters into centimeters, but really it doesn't matter. And then on Schoology, it is a drag and drop with the girls' names to tell me who ordered the most fabric. Moving on to the back. On the back, numbers 1 and 2, they are from today's lesson. Number 1 says Quan bought 8 6/10 meters of fabric. How many centimeters of fabric did he buy? So you are converting 8 6/10 meters into centimeters. And I do believe, if I recall correctly, that this is a drag and drop as well. And number 2, Jason takes 2 centiliters of medicine. How many milliliters is this? So you are converting 2 centiliters into milliliters. Again, I believe it's another drag and drop type question. Both for numbers 3 and 4, they have mixed numbers in them, or fractions. We have not gone over those chapters yet, so we are going to cross 3 and 4 off. And then for number 5, they want to know which point on the graph is located at 4, 2. Remember, the 4 tells you to go to the right, the 2 tells you to go up, and then that is a multiple choice question, so choose the correct letter. And then number 6 says a bakery supplier receives an order for 2 tons of flour from a bakery chain. The flour is shipped in crates. Each crate holds 8 10-pound bags of flour. How many crates does the supplier need to ship to fulfill the order? So our first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out how many total pounds of flour one crate can hold. So one crate, remember, it holds 8 10-pound bags. So if one bag is 10 pounds and you have 8 bags, you would take 8 times 10 to get a total of 80 pounds per crate. So now that we know that there are 80 pounds per crate, and we know that they received an order for 2 tons, and they want to know how many crates that they would need to ship, we need to convert those 2 tons into pounds. Then when you have that answer, You will then take your answer right here, and you are going to divide it by the number of pounds per crate, which we know is 80. Once you divide the number of pounds 2 tons equals by 80, that will give you your total number of crates. Please let us know if you have any questions over this lesson or assignment. Thanks for listening.